The president of the Philippines threatens Canada with war, the CBC releases an odd article about housing, and a Russian citizen gets charged for insulting Putin. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. What an odd morning. I wake up today to a headline that a foreign leader wants to battle with Canada. Rodrigo Duterte, the controversial president of the Philippines, says that if Canada does not take back tons of trash within a week, he will declare war and ship the containers back himself. And I kind of have to laugh at that a little bit. It's a pretty serious situation, but just the mental image of the president stuffing full crates of garbage with a bow tie on it and shipping it to Canada thousands of miles across the sea is just kind of hysterical. But let's talk a little bit about the situation here and how it unfolded, because war is pretty hectic in case no one knew. Typically, it's a last resort. So let's dive deeper. In 2013, more than 100 containers were shipped to Manila, the capital city of the Philippines, by a Canadian company who improperly labeled them as plastics for recycling. As custom inspectors looked deeper into it, they found out that the containers actually contained garbage. And not just any garbage. This is too crazy. It included soiled adult diapers and kitchen trash. Literally piss and shit. So, according to Global News, Canada has been trying for nearly 6 years. I'm sorry. This whole story. Canada has been trying for nearly 6 years to convince the Philippines to dispose of the garbage, even though a Filipino court ordered that the trash should be returned to Canada. A Canadian lawyer looked into it, and he made the legal claim that Canada is actually in violation of the International Basel Convention, which forbids developed nations from sending their toxic or hazardous waste to developing nations without proper consent. So my only issue with this claim is that it was a private company, not the Canadian government, who was shipping this toxic waste across the world. But don't get me wrong, this was still extremely wrong, and it's an issue. It's basically like you making a deal with someone. Let's say, I'll give you $5 for a box of chocolates, and you hand them the money and you go on your way. And when you get home, you open the box and you find out it's like a bunch of dead insects inside. You're basically lied to and you were misled. If you promise to send recyclable goods over, that's what you should deliver. You don't lie and replace those things, which are actually useful, with adult diapers filled with poop. The recyclable content can do a lot of good for a nation like the Philippines. They can reuse it and create consumer goods without having to create additional waste. They can reuse our waste and use it to better their country. In regards to the company responsible, it's terrible business practice and shameful. This company doesn't represent Canada as a whole though, and is certainly not a representative of the government. If countries started declaring war on each other because of private companies' actions, the floodgates to chaos would open. If you treat companies as embodiments of the government, you could have companies out here that are doing things to annoy foreign powers, doing things to actively engage in violence, and once the foreign governments snap, then they're having a war that will affect millions of people around the globe, resulting in countless deaths. And given the way that some of our private enterprises have operated in different countries, this would already been happening. So it's not the right take to have on the situation, but the company still has to be held responsible to a certain level of a standard. So now back to the situation we find ourselves in. War is not the proper response here. But at the same time, the Philippines definitely does have a case for a legal suit. This company needs to catch a case, and they have to pay reparations. At the very least, they should cover the cost of disposing of the garbage. They have surely violated some aspect of their agreement. You can't just promise one thing and deliver the complete opposite. You can probably even make the case that the Canadian government should intervene legally and play a hand in punishing this company. I can't get behind this notion of swinging war around as a bargaining chip though. This is the last resort, and we don't need this right now. A war fought over a pile of crap? Are you kidding me? I think it's all a bluff though, meant to display strength and empower his people. And when I say his people, I'm talking about the Filipino president. And he wants to show that he can stand up to world powers and not be taken advantage of, getting some extra election brownie points. On the off chance that he is serious about this war, which I find to be highly unlikely, that just means that he's been gravely ill-advised as to the consequences of such an action. A simple look at our NATO agreement, particularly Article 5, is all you need to see to realize that this is a path to absolute destruction. The article covers the principle of collective defense, and that states that an attack against one ally is considered an attack against all the allies. The ungodly might of the United States of America, Canada, and much of Europe would rain down collectively on the Philippines, and it would wreak havoc. That is not something anyone desires. If this actually did come down to war, the Philippines would probably last roughly 5 seconds before they're completely crushed. The soldiers might not even want to participate because it's actually a suicide mission. There's no sense in going forward with such a radical notion. At the same time, I want to make clear though that Canada has the onus placed upon them to do the right thing and get that garbage taken care of. Despite the idiocy of insinuating warfare, the Filipino grievances are actually justified, and the company needs to be held responsible for what they've done here. There are certain standards that they need to abide by, and what they've done is completely shameful. The Canadian government, it seems like it's up to them now to help the Philippines along with finding a solution. That might come in the form of simply forcing the company to do something, or even taking it to an international court to get a proper ruling on the situation. But one thing's for sure, something has to be done because the actions that took place here were highly unethical, and we don't want that kind of bad tension between us and the Philippines. They're kind of going crazy with this notion of combat, but despite that, if you look at what happened, they do have a right to be angry. They've taken it pretty far. It's a radicalized response to the situation, but at the same time, we should take it upon ourselves to be the bigger person and actually help them out here. The next thing I want to talk about is a crazy article that was put out by the CBC recently, and the headline reads, "We need to transform housing politics. Treating homes as commodities has caused a crisis." This is probably one of the worst articles that I've read in recent memory. It strays away from reality and proposes foolish policies as a recommendation for a situation that they have failed to grasp entirely. The entirety of the article is based on an interview with a sociology professor from LSE. And one of the first quotes here is that if there's anything Vancouverites can agree on, it's housing prices have spun out of control. Okay, I agree with that. His next thing that he goes on to say, the first step in addressing it is realizing the crisis is not permanent. Once again, I'm in agreement with that. Then he goes on to say, people tend to talk about the housing problem almost as if it's the weather, like a natural force. But obviously, it's something created by political and economic projects and choices. So this is where he's starting to lose me. In my head, I'm just thinking, okay. And his whole quote here comes off as an obvious fact being wrapped in fancy analogies to make it sound like he spent years trying to come up with that. Who honestly thinks that housing prices are a natural force, like they're magical and beyond our control? The elements dictate how much your home costs. It's common knowledge that political and economic factors set the terms here. It's not a groundbreaking discovery. He's simply stating what most people already assume. The professor claims that housing and the crisis surrounding it has been precipitated by a global movement toward treating housing as a commodity. Well, here's another issue. Homes and property are commodities though. They are goods. They have value. They are traded. This is the essence of a commodity. They are treated in relation to what they really are. What is the alternative here that he's proposing? He doesn't even actually say it. What does he want? For us to treat them like figments of our imagination or something like that? He does touch upon something kind of important there when he mentions the global impacts of housing. He didn't target this, but that is in fact where the issue lies, at least in my opinion. And it's not as a result of the way we classify these assets as he seems to be insinuating. Foreign investment into Canadian housing markets has had numerous negative effects, and it's more impactful than what he's talking here with linguistics. Throughout his entire interview, he is repeatedly faced with the question, what factors have led to this radical housing crisis in terms of prices and availability? And never once has he mentioned the impact and the role of foreign investment. He seems to be targeting a widely obscure notion that he believes is the cause of things, where, in my opinion, the way we've treated them as commodities may have been a side effect of the problem, but it definitely isn't the root cause of things here. And if you were to tackle that, first of all, it seems unrealistic to shift your mindset away from viewing them as commodities. The real problem that has to be tackled is the way foreign ownership has negatively impacted the market. In Vancouver alone, $75 billion worth of real estate is tied to offshore owners, according to the Vancouver Sun. Guess what? Those offshore owners don't live here, defeating the primary utility of having a home in the first place, to live in it. Now, you tie in the fact that the demand for housing is increased, but you've kept the supply the same. You've expanded demand into markets that are far beyond the borders of Canada into foreign territory. It's the same finite property, but now with more bidders, which can drive up the price exponentially, as we've seen. This itself is very different than an influx in Canadian bidders because the perks of certain foreign territories are different. For example, American buyers have the edge of a more powerful dollar, and other foreign markets typically want to invest in Canadian real estate as a store of capital. Canada is a developed nation with a strong market that produces powerful returns. Whatever you want to label it as, the basic fact is that it is a good that provides value, and it's super attractive to foreign owners right now. The offshore ownership eats up the market, and now a housing crisis erupts because you're playing a zero-sum game here. Every house that slips out of a Canadian's hand isn't being replenished. We're faced with rent at exceedingly high rates driven up by this demand. But at the same time, you have wealthy foreign owners who don't really care that much and are perfectly content with just leaving the houses empty because it is a store of value to them that keeps appreciating with time. The article that makes a good point about how simply raising supply isn't the solution here, and I'm in agreement with that, but for different reasons. So, in my interpretation, if you increase supply with all factors remaining the same, foreign ownership issues will just compound because now you haven't changed the issue or even attempted to tackle it at its root. By simply saying increase supply, the same issues are going to be present and the foreign ownership is going to continue to grow. Then the article gets into some insane policy recommendations that won't have massive positive impacts in the best case and a regression in the worst case. They suggest a rent freeze, owning a secondary home resulting in higher taxes, restrictions on speculation, and stronger tenant rights. So, some of these ideas are better than others. Some of them are actually good, but in combination, this is literally a formula for decreased investment and a reduction in rental spaces. This becomes clear when you conceptualize the situation a little bit deeper. So, first of all, many people can't even afford to purchase a house outright, especially young people. Placing the harshest restrictions you can on landlords, making it vastly less profitable to rent out space, is going to result in them looking for other opportunities that present higher gains, and that's where the capital is going to go. So, now the next step. Builders will be supposedly restricted from market speculation, making an even more uncertain playing field as landlords are less interested in purchasing real estate, and now builders have less incentive to even create units as the risk goes up. The speculation can cause harm, but at the same time, it's a guiding force for them to try and conceptualize how much profit there is to be made. On top of this, tenant rights are already fairly strong in many cities across Canada. It would have been good to hear from him to explain where exactly he wants to tighten things up, but he neglected to do that. This is a marketplace. Every action has an effect, and you need to address both sides of the equation. Those policy suggestions might have some short-term impacts, but in the long term, it'll make housing in terms of landlord ownership less ideal, resulting in less investment. That reduction in investment is going to topple the construction of these units, and that's going to result in less space available. I only see that as compounding the issue. The housing epidemic is complex and multifaceted. These band-aid solutions aren't really going to do much for people in the long term. It has to be a grassroots change. The pressures that have built up from foreign investment seems to be a more realistic target to discuss, as opposed to the semantics of whether or not regarding housing as a commodity has caused this issue. I think the professor does make some good points, and I'm not trying to disregard all of his notions, but the focus is entirely off. If you wanted to make an improvement, greater restrictions on foreign investment will undoubtedly produce more and far meaningful results by allowing more Canadians to enter the market, compared to a policy proposal in the article, which is based on not even the correct context. The professor has identified a certain area of contention, but it's not the crux of the issue, and it seems like he's masquerading it as if it really is, and it doesn't make much sense to me. Luckily, he's not in government, and he's not going to be the ones putting forward these actions, but then again, who knows? Because it seems like the bar to enter the political sphere has shrunk over the years. We'll end off today with a completely insane article straight out of Russia. So, a Russian court fines an internet user for dissing Vladimir Putin. A local man has been fined the equivalent of $470 for violating Russia's new law against insulting state officials on the internet. So, what exactly did he do? He makes a post saying, and I quote, "Putin is an unbelievable fuckwit," end of quote. So, according to a human rights legal expert, this might be the first time that Russia's court system has enforced this new law against insulting state officials. Things appear to be going down a pretty dystopian path over there in Russia. This is just simply the tip of the iceberg. It might be the first time they've enforced this fine, but it's not going to be the last, and it's going to evolve. With your intuition, you can fully see where it's heading. What's stopping them from upping it and truly silencing any and all opposition? Government censorship should never reach these extremes. Freedom of speech is already limited enough and in appropriate context. A lot of people are confused, and they make the claim that freedom of speech allows you to say anything you want. This is already not true. You can't lie. You can get in trouble for that legally. You can't threaten someone. You can get in trouble for that legally. You can't incite for violence. Like, there are already restrictions on what you can't say. Now, adding another rule, like what happened in Russia, about disrespecting these state officials is unnecessary, and it opens the door to mass corruption. You have to ask yourself, what even constitutes an insult? In this case, it's clear. He called him a fuckwit, but it won't always be like that. What if they feel insulted that you're criticizing one of their laws? What if they feel insulted that you're criticizing this law? Then you'll get fined. But wait, what if they want to up your sentence? What if instead of getting fined, you're going to go to jail? What if instead of going to jail, you're going to go and get hanged in the streets? There really is no limit to the power the government has once they control your voice. It's a deadly tool because it can then expand into controlling much more than that. It can eventually seep into controlling your thoughts as well. And once that happens, there is complete state control over the individual. It's no longer individuals, it's one collective, one hive mind under one leader, Vladimir Putin. And you become a victim to whatever his whims are and what he's thinking as he's going to project them onto you because your free speech no longer exists. The power of speech is truly amazing, and we shouldn't be so eager to relinquish it. It's our duty as citizens to fight tooth and nail to preserve this privilege that we have here in North America. We don't want to end up like Russia. It's truly becoming a very scary place, and as news comes out, it seems like it's getting worse and worse. So, that about does it for today. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. I'll see you soon.